Morning, everybody. It's Comic Crack, doing a bit of a video on. I'm finally getting around to playing Compass Games' version of I Will Fight No More Forever. It was a Simulations Canada game originally, I believe, in the early '80s. And there's not much coverage about the actual game that I've found online, so I thought this would be good. Do an overview, and then we'll kind of check in at various turns. I've already started playing. I'm just about to begin turn 7, but I thought I'd kind of catch up and give you a bit of insight into what all of this is. So there's 2 different maps for this game. So the overview is it's the retreat of the Nez Perce, June to October 1877. They were going to be moved from their land into a reservation. They tried to come to an agreement, and basically tempers flared. Some younger indigenous people rose up and killed some army, and it kind of went from there, creating, basically a hunt as they fled with their peoples eventually up into Canada. So what we're looking at here is we've got Idaho, we've got Wyoming, we've got Montana, and we've got Washington and Oregon there. So this is the strategic map, and then above I folded it in half because it's pretty big. There's 4 different tactical maps. One of the main purposes of the game is, as the army player, you're trying to hunt down the indigenous players, and when you enter the hex with them, when you're playing against somebody, all of the counters are turned upside down, so it's a little bit of a surprise as to who's coming and etc., and who they're going to find. They have to do a discovery on the hex to see if they've located the indigenous players, and if so, that's when you move to the tactical map and kind of fight it out to see who's remained, who's captured, who's killed. And like I said, your basic, everybody starts kind of in and around here. I think it was hex, I want to say it was hex 9, 11, around Mount Idaho, I believe is where everything had started. Traditionally, the initial, when I was looking at some of the information that they have in with the magazine, which we'll talk about a little later, we'll change the camera angle and we'll look a little bit at the actual magazine itself. Some of the added material that's in here, they give you a map of the original, maybe we'll try it, of the path of the Nez Perce. The route that they actually took. So I'm sort of, because I'm playing this solo, I'm sort of following that map. There are some restrictions within the game. For example, the first 9 turns, the indigenous players can't leave the borders of Idaho. So you're really limited in where you can move. The army player, right from the top, they can move wherever they want, except for kind of this section of Canada. They can't travel past the border over here. So apparently your route is sort of up and over as the indigenous player to try to escape through these. I can't remember exactly which hexes, but somewhere in there. So because I'm playing solo, there's a bit of, I'm not able to be surprised by movements. So I figured I would just use that as the basic layout. And like I said, turn 7, we're just about to begin turn 7, and all my indigenous forces are down here just on the border, basically waiting until they can breach the border. It's one of those things, the indigenous peoples at the time, especially the elders, they didn't want a war, they didn't want to fight, they wanted to try to figure something out. They were on the fence as to what they were going to do, even if they were going to go to the reserves, or they just wanted a piece of land for themselves, right? They just wanted the Americans to fulfill their end of the bargain that they originally had come to terms with. Part of the problem, from what I understand, I've watched a little bit of documentaries on it, part of the problem was that gold was found on the land that was given to them, or the land that was determined to be theirs in kind of the negotiations. And as happens a lot in history, they went back on that and wanted in on their land and corralled them off to reservations. So as the Indigenous player, you can't instigate any sort of fighting. You have to wait until the Army player has made a move and discovered you. Then it's kind of free reign from there. So that's kind of the very basic overviews of the game. I'll probably pause it here and then we'll move closer to look at some of the details and talk a little bit more about gameplay. And then I'll check in as we're going and we'll talk about, I'll just kind of show you a couple of the turns as we're going, explain why I've laid everything out like this, etc. So I'll be back. Look at the strategic map itself. A couple of things that I'll just talk about. One of the things that I had trouble with last night, and even this morning, it's a lot easier, is discerning the different terrain types on the map here, especially when you get areas like this over here where they're all mixed in. On the camera there, it looks even more difficult to pick up. In person, the image is a lot better than probably what you're seeing on your screen right now. So each terrain type, so we have the plains, we have like the rolling hills, we have the wooded mountains, wooded mountains, and then major mountains. These open plains, it's 1 movement point. The rolling hills, it's 2 movement points. The wooded mountains, it's 3 movement points. The major mountains, you can only enter and exit hexes that are that with the hex, where the hex side is a river. So like this, for example, over here. Otherwise, you can't enter them. So if I was here, for example, I couldn't enter or exit from this hex side. I would have to enter or exit from over here, or over here, or over there. So it really limits your movements in the mountains. The mountains, it's harder for the Army player to find you. If they end up landing on a hex and you're in the mountains, it's -4 to their die roll, which everything is a die roll, of course, because it's a war game. So that discovery is there. So I struggled with that a little bit and had to refer back and really have a good look. But like I said, even this morning, it's looking a lot clearer. So one of my criticisms last night when I was playing it was that, and this morning that criticism is gone because it's pretty apparent looking at it now in the daylight. So I've laid out all the Army units at the top here. They come into the game at specific game turns. You don't, as the Army player, sorry, I just moved this microphone gently here. As the Army player, you don't get all of your forces at once. Some of the, I've put some of the Army players' chits, what they say is that putting the counters upside down on their starting hex. When I was starting out, because I had the rule set here, I didn't have a lot of room to do that, so I just did it for the first bunch, and then the rest, they're still up top. When they come into the game, I'll put them on their starting hexes. The plan kind of for the Army player, and one of the things that I guess a limitation for the Army player, so this here is the major river, the Snake River, and the Army player cannot cross any major rivers for the first, I want to say it's the first 10 turns, I believe, but I'm not sure now saying that out loud. But either way, early on in the game, they're very limited what they can do. So all the other forces, they have free reign everywhere, like I said, except for Canada. So my idea was a big part of the game is your units need to be in supply to be able to use their fast movement. So we'll see if this will focus, and we'll give this a shot here. So for example, we look on, where are my glasses here? We look on Looking Glass, and there's 3 different numbers, 11, 18, and 6. 11 is their regular movement, 18 is their fast movement, and then 6 is their ability to hide kind of thing. So that'll work in when you're doing the discovery roll. The Indigenous players, if they use fast movement, they have to wait 3 full game turns before they can use fast movement again. So it limits, because they're traveling, the idea is that the Indigenous players are traveling with like women, children, encampments, that sort of thing. It's not just men on horses, it's families, it's the whole 9 yards. So they only have so much in them to be able to kind of get away a short burst at a time. With the army players, they're in supply if they start their turn in either a town or a fort hex, then they're considered in supply and can use their fast movement. There's no limitations on when they can use that. They can always use them turn after turn, as long as they begin their turn in a town or a fort. So my original idea for the army units that could move across the country was to move them, try to get them to an army, to a fort or a town every single turn, which is difficult, especially coming through these terrains when you have to avoid mountains and that sort of thing, to sort of block their path. Again, because there's the element of surprise that's not there because I'm playing it solo, I really just want to stick to the historical as much as I possibly can. Obviously, I haven't done a mountain of research into this time and these particular battles. But that's my thinking going on, and then eventually the rest of these counters and the army units will come into play. So I find that part a little difficult. The first part of the game was really slow. These indigenous units have been here for a couple of turns already and just standing by, which I guess, again, it could be the idea being that they're resting with their families, they're looking for a piece of land to settle in on, and they're looking to see what kind of deal can be made with the army, if any, or with America or the United States, I guess, if any. So it's a bit of a slow part now. I have a feeling once we hit, I've marked in turn 10 there is when the indigenous units can breach the border of Idaho and start moving. There's check-in points throughout the game where you have to be at beyond a certain hex line, north of a certain hex line, and east of a certain hex row at, I believe, turn 25, and then I think it's turn 29 or 30. Sitting Bull can come into play if you choose so. If you choose, sir, do, sir. With the Goo Goose, choose, sir, do, sir. So that's kind of the look at the strategy and what I'm thinking of. There's a few things that I have problems with the game so far. One of the biggest things that I have issues with are the instructions themselves. I find the rule set incredibly difficult, and that's probably partially due to I'm not used to this kind of layout. I'm used to the classic SPI columns. The other thing that bothers me about this rule set is the amount of kind of spelling errors. Even on the chits themselves, there was one Sturgis, and his units are labeled Sturgis, but him as a leader is labeled Surgis, and in the rules it's Sturgis. There's multiple spelling errors and miswording. Typing if instead of has come up a couple of times, and I find that incredibly frustrating because if you're going to put this much time into kind of a war recreation kind of game, especially historical game like this, use the most very basic spell check and have someone do a very basic proofread at least more than once. I find it insulting to the history, insulting to us as people who are putting time and money and interest into playing these games. I think it's a real problem, and I don't really see an excuse for it, to be honest, because again, some of the mistakes that I've seen in here so far, spelling wise, are very, very, very basic. It's not like they're trying to make a point and are misspelling a very complicated word. If you're going to put the time and energy into the rest of the game like they have, especially when it's a redesign and the game is pretty much made for you already. I haven't played the original, so I don't know how far this one delineates from the original gameplay, but I imagine when you have a very solid template of an original game that you're then building from, creating a new map, updating some of the rules, and maybe changing some of the tactics and stuff, I can't imagine that it's more work than just creating a game from scratch. So I find it ridiculous, to be honest. So that's pretty much the overview there. And then from this point, we'll kind of check in as the game progresses, and I'll show you a couple of game turns, and we'll talk through the the play order and what happens first and what everything means. And then once we get into battles, I'll show you some of the tactical map. I haven't tackled that map myself yet, so that'll be an interesting thing for me as well. Okay, we'll see you in a minute.